Everyone remembers the big names when talking about 80s movies, but a lot of the decade's most interesting work slipped by without notice. Some films had small releases, others got lost in the noise, and a few simply faded before finding an audience. Decades later, they stand out for their craft and originality, overlooked at the time but impossible to ignore. Local Hero turned a corporate land grab into the most unexpectedly heartwarming film about Scottish villages and oil companies you'll ever see, proving Bill Forsyth knew exactly how to make capitalism look ridiculous without getting preachy about it. Peter Riegert plays Mac, this Houston oil executive sent to buy an entire Scottish fishing village called Furness, so his company can build a refinery. Except the locals are way more interested in stargazing and pub gossip than his corporate millions. And the whole operation falls apart when a stubborn beachcomber named Ben refuses to sell his stretch of beach for anything less than the number of grains of sand he's holding. What's absolutely wild about this production is that Forsyth convinced Hollywood legend Burt Lancaster to fly to the Scottish Highlands and play Felix Happer, the eccentric oil tycoon, obsessed with astronomy, which nearly broke their modest budget, but gave the film instant credibility with international distributors who wouldn't have touched a quirky Scottish comedy otherwise. Lancaster was coming off years of intense American studio pressure and reportedly treated the shoot like a personal vacation, wandering around the set after hours actually stargazing for real and telling Forsyth the Scottish sky was the true star of the movie. The production stitched together two real Scottish towns to create fictional Furness, dealing with brutal weather that left actors covered in midge bites and shivering through takes. But Forsyth later joked the landscape itself co-directed the film because all those unscripted foggy moments wound up on screen and completely reshaped the dreamy tone. For young Peter Capaldi, playing local rep Danny Oldson marked his first real acting gig after doing stand-up comedy, and he was so nervous on set that Peter Riegert spent nights running lines with him and coaching him through scenes until Capaldi accidentally tripped over a cable during the village dance sequence and turned it into spontaneous physical comedy that delighted everyone. The film's bittersweet ending, where Happer scraps the refinery to build an observatory, instead left Mac haunted by what he experienced in Scotland, capturing this weird cultural moment when audiences were starting to question whether selling everything for profit was actually worth it, becoming a quiet cult classic that influenced every fish out of water story about corporate suits discovering their humanity in unexpected places. Babette's feast takes place in a freezing Danish religious village where pleasure died decades ago, and watching a Parisian chef spend her entire lottery winnings on one perfect French dinner for these uptight Protestants is simultaneously the most generous and rebellious act you'll ever see on film. Stéphane Audran plays Babette, a refugee who works as housekeeper for two elderly sisters running their late father's strict Protestant sect. And after 14 years of silent service, she wins 10,000 francs and shocks everyone by spending every penny importing exotic French ingredients to prepare an elaborate feast that breaks down emotional barriers and heals old wounds through the sheer power of perfect cooking. What makes this production absolutely fascinating is that director Gabriel Axel fought for years to get funding because nobody wanted to back a slow-paced Danish film about religious repression and French cuisine. But he insisted on historical accuracy that meant sourcing authentic 19th century ingredients, including live quails and rare wines flown in at enormous expense. Audran took method acting to another level by living simply during the shoot, wandering the village alone and refusing to speak French offset to heighten her sense of exile, later describing the role as one where she gave everything away both on screen and in the actual process of making the film. The feast sequence itself became an endurance test, requiring weeks of filming, where actors had to eat incredibly rich food through multiple takes under hot lights, with cast members joking they couldn't look at French cuisine for a month afterward, but also calling it a spiritual communion that defined their careers. The film sparked minor controversy among Scandinavian conservatives who worried it encouraged indulgence over Protestant values, with Danish newspapers publishing letters accusing the movie of corrupting simplicity with pleasure in a twist that perfectly mirrored the anxieties of the film's own characters. That backlash faded fast when the film won the Oscar for Best Foreign Language Film, cementing its journey from controversial outsider story to beloved meditation on how generosity, expressed through art, can transcend the rigid boundaries people build around themselves. Missing puts Jack Lemmon in a Chilean nightmare, where his missing son becomes proof that his own government cares more about coups than citizens, and watching him unravel from patriotic businessman to furious truth seeker is one of the most devastating performances of the 1980s. Lemmon plays Ed Horman, the conservative American father who flies to Santiago during the 1973 military coup to find his journalist son Charlie, teaming up with daughter-in-law Beth despite their clashing politics, as they navigate a bureaucratic maze where every American official gives them the runaround and they slowly realize the embassy knows exactly what happened and doesn't plan to help. What's absolutely wild is how both Lemon and Sissy spent serious time with the real Ed and Joyce Horman before filming, absorbing their grief so completely that crew members reported Lemon breaking down after takes where Ed gets stonewalled by officials, especially during scenes where he learns his son's fate. Sissy refused to decompress between takes at all, reading account after account of Pinche-era disappearances and staying in character's emotional state even off-set, later calling it one of the most punishing experiences of her career that permanently changed how she viewed institutional power. Director Costa Gavras couldn't film in Chile for obvious reasons, so they recreated Santiago in Mexico. But 2 days before crucial scenes, the Mexican army suddenly withdrew promised tanks, citing diplomatic sensitivities, forcing the art department to scramble and build realistic wooden tanks just to fill the gap. The real Ed and Joyce Horman worked closely with cast throughout production, sometimes halting rehearsals to correct the smallest inaccuracies in how their pain got portrayed, which kept everything authentic but emotionally brutal for everyone involved. The film got immediately banned in Chile and drew controversy stateside too, with the State Department releasing official statements contesting its portrayal, while Universal begged Costa Gavras to explicitly identify the setting as Chile 1973. The contentious reception globally cemented its reputation as a film unafraid to accuse powerful governments of complicity in murder, forever standing as both a family tragedy and a warning about how easily bureaucracies sacrifice individuals for political convenience. Tough Turf throws James Spader into San Fernando Valley gang warfare as Morgan Hiller, a prep school transplant who immediately draws the wrath of street punk Nick Hauser after falling for his girlfriend Frankie, escalating into back alley fights that define mid-80s teen rebellion at its grittiest. Spader was well into his 20s playing the teenage outsider, but he dove into method intensity by spending days off walking the actual tough neighborhoods where they filmed, sometimes getting hassled by real local kids who considered the cast outsiders invading their territory and refusing stunt doubles for risky fight sequences where he suffered mild injuries, twice that he channeled into raw performances. Paul Mones leaned so heavily into Nick's cruelty that his off-camera intensity created genuine tension with Spader, blurring the line between acting and actual hostility in ways that fed the film's volatile energy and made every confrontation feel dangerously unpredictable. Robert Downey Jr. was still unknown when he showed up as Morgan's eccentric friend Jimmy, bringing improvisational energy that constantly threw Spader and Kim Richards off script and caused frequent delays when actors broke character, laughing at his spontaneous bits, with director Fritz Kirsch giving Downey considerable freedom to invent dialogue and physical comedy that became essential to Jimmy's charm. The film's home video releases became a fragmented mess, with the German VHS cut losing 9 minutes of violence and dialogue while replacing the climactic song with German pop, and the US video swapping out the title track entirely, distorting both tone and resolution in ways that still frustrate collectors hunting for the original theatrical experience. Critics dismissed it, but the film became this scrappy snapshot of 80s teen rebellion that quietly launched two actors who would later define an entire generation of screen oddballs, proving that sometimes the most uncomfortable productions capture youth alienation more authentically than any polished studio attempt ever could. Crossroads sends Ralph Macchio on a quest to find Robert Johnson's lost 30th song alongside aging bluesman Willie Brown, journeying through Mississippi until they reach an actual crossroads where Willie reveals he sold his soul to the devil decades ago, and Eugene has to win it back through a guitar duel against the devil's ringer, Jack Butler, played by Steve Vai, in a showdown that became one of the most legendary music sequences of the 80s. What makes this production truly remarkable is that Ralph trained obsessively for months with Ry Cooder himself, blistering his fingers practicing blues guitar for hours daily. But on set, he still had to pantomime the intricate fingering while Vai performed the actual shredding off-screen, creating this weird disconnect where Ralph's character is supposed to be winning, but everyone knows Vai is the real virtuoso. Ry Cooder spent 10 days choreographing that final guitar battle with military precision, directing Macchio and Vai like a conductor, and sometimes halting shoots to rewrite riffs if the emotional intensity fell short, building this genuinely competitive atmosphere where crew took sides and the tension felt more like actual blues battles in smoky back rooms than Hollywood filmmaking. The studio's PR campaign leaned hard into Faustian imagery and devil mythology, sparking panic among conservative Southern groups who accused the film of being occult propaganda disguised as musical drama, leading several Mississippi gospel town theaters to cancel screenings or demand edits to the Crossroads ritual scenes. That moral panic cooled, eventually, but stories about Crossroads being banned from small southern towns still circulate in blues lore circles, forever linking the film to uncomfortable questions about how much art risks by summoning Robert Johnson's ghost and whether Hollywood had any right telling stories rooted in Delta blues tradition. Insignificance drops Marilyn Monroe, Albert Einstein, Joe McCarthy, and Joe DiMaggio into a Manhattan hotel room for one surreal night, where philosophical debates spiral into violence and everyone leaves more haunted than when they arrived. Nicolas Roeg never names his four icons, but the allusions are crystal clear, as the actress tries proving her intellect to the professor, while the senator barges in wielding Cold War paranoia, all converging in conversations that swing from playful to brutal, as the professor obsesses over his watch frozen at 8:15, the exact moment Hiroshima got vaporized. What's fascinating about this production is how Roeg deliberately created discomfort to feed the performances, staging hotel sequences chronologically, with emotionally escalating scenes built on genuine exhaustion, and forbidding rehearsals beyond basic blocking, to force actors into responding like they were truly meeting for the first time. Teresa Russell threw herself into the actress role so completely she declined body doubles for the intense assault scenes where the senator mistakes her for a call girl and threatens her, deliberately isolating herself from other cast members offset to preserve her character's loneliness in ways that left her feeling spent and disturbed after filming wrapped. Gary Busey leaned so hard into McCarthy's paranoia as the senator that his off-camera intensity unsettled everyone until he actually broke character during the abuse scene after witnessing Russell's distress and refused to continue until he knew she was safe. Roeg's insistence on single-take climaxes pushed everyone to their limits, with Russell nearly fainting during repeated takes, and crew members later calling the atmosphere half playful and half deeply disturbed, becoming infamous among British indie circles for how far Roeg would go chasing human frailty on camera. The film sparked immediate controversy at Cannes, where audiences walked out or confronted Roeg and Russell during heated Q&As, with feminist commentators accusing him of exploiting Monroe's tragic legacy for art house shock value. While critics debated whether the film's visceral violence crossed ethical lines, it earned cult status among viewers who appreciated Roeg's philosophical ambition, even as mainstream audiences rejected his willingness to brutalize icons in service of questioning whether fame itself endures beyond a few fleeting impressions. The Last Emperor follows Puyi from his coronation as a toddler in the Forbidden City through decades of revolution, exile, and communist re-education, tracing his transformation from powerless child emperor to garden-tending citizen as China's entire world collapses and rebuilds around him. The production's intrigue lies in the paradox at its core. Bertolucci was granted unprecedented access to the Forbidden City, yet his every move was constrained by officials who dictated what could and couldn't be shown, turning the act of filmmaking itself into a negotiation between art and authority. John Lone spent days cloistered in his Beijing hotel room, refusing visitors and limiting his English to capture Puyi's emotional isolation, steeping himself in imperial etiquette with Chinese historians and memorizing gestures until the role left him emotionally drained and haunted for months. Bertolucci kept cast trapped inside the Forbidden City for long stretches without modern comforts to amplify the feeling of confinement, with Lone later calling the experience terrifying and beautiful, while admitting it taught him how easily power and helplessness collide. Several scenes exploring palace intrigue got shot, but were cut due to local fears of offending imperial family descendants, with rumors claiming reels of this material still linger in Beijing studio vaults and occasionally surface at underground Chinese film festivals in fragmentary bootleg form that crew members whisper about decades later. The film swept 9 Academy Awards, but drew immediate criticism from Chinese nationalists, who accused Bertolucci of reducing their history to Orientalist spectacle told through a Western lens, sparking a minor diplomatic scandal when officials protested scenes showing drug addiction and sexual intrigue that got the film temporarily pulled from Chinese television. That cultural backlash revealed the impossible tightrope of telling another nation's story, with Bertolucci later reflecting that capturing China's transformation meant risking offense as much as inviting understanding, cementing the film's legacy as both a technical masterpiece and a continuing argument about who gets to tell whose history. Gallipoli hands Mark Lee his breakout role as Archie Hamilton, an idealistic sprinter who teams up with cynical Frank Dunn, and they both enlist for World War I, before getting trapped in the catastrophic Battle of the Neck, where miscommunication sends Australian soldiers charging into Turkish machine guns. Lee was practically unknown when Peter Weir cast him, showing up on day one, completely terrified, because he's surrounded by seasoned actors and Mel Gibson fresh off Mad Max, looking like he owns the place. What makes this production fascinating is how Lee channeled his own fear directly into Archie's vulnerability, spending mornings before shoots wandering alone through the Australian outback, and staying so deep in character that crew members started whispering about how he wouldn't break even during lunch breaks. Gibson, meanwhile, was isolating himself off camera and fighting serious anxiety and insomnia to maintain Frank's haunted look, refusing to socialize between takes, while Weir pushed him through emotionally brutal trench sequences that left Gibson legitimately traumatized for years. The Battle of the Neck scenes destroyed both actors, with Gibson running those charges over and over until he was physically spent, and crew members saying his raw devastation changed the entire mood on set. The real kicker is that iconic freeze-frame ending where Archie sprints into machine gun fire wasn't even in the original script. Peter added it late in production, which completely blindsided Lee on the spot. Persistent rumors claim Peter filmed an alternate ending showing both characters surviving but returning home, psychologically shattered, with extras swearing they shot scenes in Egypt. Though Peter firmly denied any such footage exists, and collectors spent years hunting Australian archives for these lost reels. Decades later, Lee described feeling forever trapped by the role, haunted by how audiences only remember him as that frozen boy running toward death, proving that sometimes the most punishing productions permanently alter everyone involved, while cementing a film's place as an ongoing debate about whether martyrdom hits harder than showing survival's devastating aftermath.